All right, I think we're going to get started. We're just going to jump in. I know that we've got a couple other folks that are going to hop in here as we go, and we welcome folks to jump into the conversation anytime you want. And you don't have to stay for the whole hour, but it's an action-packed hour. And my good friend Carla Burkholder is with me today, and we're going to be digging into some topics. And this one is a continuation of the last two. Actually, we had two Horizon Room topics sort of progressively leading to this last one. This is the last of our current season of Horizon Room topics, and I'll prompt you again at the end of our session today, but I'm really looking for feedback. I'm listening to the folks. I've gotten a lot of input from colleagues on what types of topics folks would like to see discussed here in the Horizon Room. And that's awesome, because this is really your space, and I want to make sure that we're addressing things that are critical for you out there in the field, doing all the work, and then it provides us an opportunity to support. So if you haven't been to the Horizon Room, my name is Chris McMurray. We'll jump into some introductions. I am the Chief Academic Officer here with the Learning Council. I have the enviable position of working with educators, with you, side by side, elbow to elbow, knee to knee, and get folks resources and connected to colleagues and connected to ideas, and really help systems to move forward in an organic fashion, mindfully, and share resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Carla, who's going to introduce herself as well. And then as people join us, they can hop into the discussion.
I'm Carla Burkholder. I'm the Director of Technology at Schertz-Cibolo Universal City ISD. We're in the San Antonio area.
Yeah, welcome. Carla, for those of you who don't know or haven't been here, Carla is a good friend of mine and a very respected colleague. She hops into this Horizon Room pretty often, and with good reason. It's because she has great ideas and experience to share. And if you're taking notes, take note of that name. Looks like Derek Brown just popped into the room also. He's another person. You'll want to hold on to those names, because if you're looking to connect with someone, these are two people who can share some wisdom and some learning, and at the very least connect you with other folks who are doing the work. Derek, you're muted right now. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Good afternoon. Good to see you, Chris.
Hi, Carla. Back at you.
I am Derek Brown. I am with Portland Public Schools here in the Great Pacific Northwest, and we serve about 45,000 students, and I'm the Senior Director of Technology Operations.
Nice. How's the weather out there? Raining?
It's not raining. No, we've had a fantastic few days. Don't expect any precipitation till the weekend. So
of course
super excited.
Way, right?
Hence the big smile on my face.
Yeah, of course it's going to rain on the weekend. It always seems to do that. That's so appropriate. So what we're talking about today is redundancy and efficiency, and it's really about offloading the system. Before I give you some context, I want to toss out a reminder about what the Horizon Room is. The Horizon Room is a safe space to talk and to do some truth talk and some real talk, and we really want to start digging into topics that are relevant and maybe pain points in some way for folks out there in the field, and really start to provide some connectivity, some resource, some solutions. And so, as I mentioned before, we're getting the next season together. Definitely put those things on your calendar and register for all of them, because we are going to be digging into a little bit deeper on some of these things as we go. So I'm going to give us some context here, and I'm going to lay this out. I've been keeping this particular slide in the deck for the last couple of sessions, and it's important because as we think of this progressively, we are dealing with all three of these layers in some fashion. And so we started out the conversation with that tech art infrastructure. It's that foundational layer. It includes the software, it includes the security, all of those things that are necessary to be running underneath the rest of the machine in order for the top two layers to actually work. The logistical layer talks about how we move people and things through the system in order to facilitate high levels of learning and teaching and facilitation. And then that top one is really the design for learning layer, and that's where that's where the magic happens. Not that it's not happening below, but because of those bottom two layers, that top layer of design for learning is much more effective. So we're going to be digging into some the topic today, which actually impacts three of those, and it also impacts your pocketbook, and that's an area where we all feel a little bit of pain, and if we're not smart about it and mindful, we're likely to actually, cause things to go downhill, and we're gonna make things worse. So today we're talking about some of that load, and I'm gonna throw this little bit of research. This is just a snapshot. 2,000 is the number, and it's actually probably more than that, number of discrete apps being used in school districts today. Of that number, 300 are actually known by the IT and or the teaching and learning department to be existing and being used within the system, which means 1,700 apps within that same system are feral. They're running around like rabbits out there, and they might even be multiplying like rabbits. But what's scary about that is that represents 1,700 budget redundancies. It represents 1,700 security breaches, potentially. It represents 1,700 opportunities for a student to be using a disconnected resource. And that becomes scary to me, right? We have all kinds of conversations about equity and about how we are providing resource to teachers and students. And especially now, I mean, I just read an article that was talking about how you start retiring hardware rather, and that's not even part of this data. That's another study entirely, and we've all seen those antiques, the relics, in classrooms that are still being held onto. And I know Derek and Carla are smirking because they know that dance. And so those are real numbers, and it represents real fear and real risk, but also real confusion. So here's our challenge. The challenge for today is that systems are burdened by an overabundance of digital resources and outdated hardware. We know that. By burdened, I mean heavy. It's on their backs. The teachers feel it. They look at their single sign-on application or dashboard, if they have one, and they see a sea of things out there, right? And that's just overwhelming. It's a mind blower. Redundancies exist that complicate the implementation. And by implementation, I mean not just getting those things up and running on devices and in classrooms, but also usage, right? If you're not teaching on that stuff, how could we teach on 3,000 resources, right? I mean, they're all fairly easy to use, but how do we teach how to design with those? That becomes daunting for me. Resources in the systems are rarely aligned to instructional purpose or goals. Here we go. Where does it align within the instructional materials scale? Is it core? Is it supplement? Is it complement? Is it not even on any of those? Is it even aligned to the things that we intend to move forward within our school system? I don't know. And then the last point there is feral resources cause inefficiency, frustration, and they pose a security risk. That's our challenge. And so today, what I'd like to tap our two experts on today is what are some of the solutions, and what do you think about that in the context of this? How do we start to sift through the stuff that we've already added and get to a place where we're really efficient and we're streamlined and we're doing the job in a mindful way? I'm going to throw that out there and ask Derek and Carla to comment on that from your own perspective.
Derek, do you want to go first?
No, go for it.
Okay. All right. Gosh, so many things. I was taking notes because there's so many things. So solutions. So the most important thing, well, there's two most important things. So can there be two most important things? Well, there is, as far as I'm concerned.
In our world, there can be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, these applications absolutely must be aligned to the curriculum. They must be aligned to the district strategic plan, the district goals for instruction. They cannot be if they are not vetted by the district. So that goes to the extreme of no free apps, right? No free apps, no free free online resources that you could buy personal subscription, that sort of thing. The other most important thing to me is security. Again, that goes to vetting. When you vet those applications, you've got to pay attention to their privacy policies and to their data sharing policies. So for us, the solution for that is that we have a process, and we require our vendors who collect any kind of student data to sign a data privacy agreement. And we are extending that to include not just student data, but any personally identifiable information. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And what I'm curious about also is, now that you've got that, because the comment about the free stuff, if you're not paying for a resource, the chances of getting any sort of a DSA conversation going with that resource provider for this much money is also that you're just not going to have any conversation with that organization, because they're like, well, it's a free resource. You do your homework. And so then, of course, sometimes teachers go, sounds good. It's like when you open up your Starbucks app, if you have one on your phone, and you're like, accept, and then off you go. And so that's interesting. Yeah, Derek, I've got another question, but I'll flip it over to Derek.
I completely agree with everything Carla said. I think the biggest challenge and opportunity that a school district has is the appropriateness. Starting with, we don't want free puppies, so we don't want free apps and free tools, but it's having those frank conversations about, does it align to the overall district's strategic goals, curriculum goals, academic goals? Start there. That conversation has to be led at the highest level, beginning with the superintendent, chief academic officer, that begins to lay the groundwork with our teachers. For those districts that have unions, begin to have conversations before these things, especially if it's a change, have those conversations ahead of time about the why. I think that's it's always want to start with the why you're doing something, why we're doing something, because of the educational value, because of what is best for students, because what is best for learning, student outcomes. Always begin with that. We here at Portland Public Schools, obviously, like many others, have been adopting curriculum, but we have a bond. So we're going to be able to move leaps and bounds, or bigger, faster. Think of Superman and all the other Marvels, or DC Comics, superheroes, faster than we ever have before, thanks to our taxpayers and the focus on adopting digital curriculum. That said, we're going to need a platform to help us look at what is currently being accessed. We have ClassLinks, My Analytics, which is a wonderful tool that helps us see what is going through the SSO, but we want something a little more robust, like Learn Platform, that can have a Chrome extension, be accessed by every student, by every teacher, so that we can see those free puppies out there and have some true data on what is being accessed, especially for curriculum that is being adopted. If a district's spending $100,000 or $1 million on a piece of software or tool, we want to make sure that it is being utilized by all of the schools, all of the teachers, whatever the case might be. And then if it isn't, how do we strengthen that program to give the teachers the support and the PD that they need? And we want to start those analytics immediately when we start or purchase. And then also before we begin, to help with the vetting. A tool like Learn Platform provides super user ability, so teacher input. I think that's critical. We don't want to roll something out that's created in the ivory tower of Office of Teaching and Learning or curriculum instruction without that teacher input and teacher buy-in.
I think that's a great point. And I wonder, I know that Portland Public, you've been rolling this for some time, and Carla, your Shirt Cibolo has been as well. I had a recent conversation with a colleague who is sort of fresh into the process, and there's a number of systems out there that are this way, and they're in the wrangling phase, and occasionally the disconnect between teaching and learning and tech is complicating the thing that you just described. And what I want to tell people is, how about let's start with, like with instruction, let's start with what the assessment is going to be. How are we going to measure success within this? And is it possible that we start with that Learn platform in the beginning of this whole process, and we have some parallels going along, so that at the point at which we add things, we automatically have the assessment tool running, and we're not then going, oh gosh, now we have to undo a bunch of stuff, pull back some things that we let loose into the wild, and then sort of shoehorn things in. Is that realistic? Is it realistic to think that you could start with something like that?
I think it was before COVID, Chris. The train has left the station now. Districts using ESSER funds and other general funds and reallocating, we had to enable and purchase digital tools so that we could learn remotely. So I think all of us had to do that. Now it's a matter of consolidating and keeping what's valuable, what's most important. So I think the train has left the station, but now we have to wrangle those feral resources.
Yeah, I know.
That's just my opinion. That's just my opinion.
What do you think, Carla? Are we in that place?
Well, I agree with Derek. I mean, that train has left the station. However, the things that we have purchased, I mean, I think part of the evaluation process, it doesn't stop once you get it. You have to, every year, you've got to look at the user analytics, look at the usage, look at if it gives you any kind of information on how it's impacted student achievement, look at it. Because if it's not good, if it's not helping, if it's not doing any good for kids, I don't care how pretty and shiny it is, and that everybody else is using it, if it's not helping your kids, it's not worth spending that money on. So we really have to make that a part of how we do business, to every year take a look at those things and make sure that they are still aligned, they are still doing what we need them to do, that they are still worth the investment for our kids.
I think that's a great point, and I completely agree. And the question that I get often, because we get this question about analog resources as well, right? You adopt a brand new ELA curriculum for middle school, and we sometimes will review that material, but sometimes not, and that's how you end up inheriting a book set from 1978 when you walk into your first classroom. And so how do you do that, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about now, is simply, it's a nuance between the digital and the analog resource. And if we're not doing it for analog resources, what makes me think that it's going to happen for digital? How do you even do that? How do you do that?
So for us, first of all, every digital resource, every purchase has to come through technology. Secondly, all digital resources are now consolidated into a single renewal budget. So, and I know who owns those, who should be reviewing those. And so starting probably about March, we're going to be saying, hey, curriculum, you need to take a look at all these, 50 applications that you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for, and make sure that they're still doing their job. And so that's just part of our process. But I think unless you have those things consolidated, where you know what's what and who's what and who owns it and where it's going, that it would be really, really hard to do that, because you don't have a way to track if folks are doing that.
I see. And so then, in terms of ownership on that one, you're probably instigating the process, or at least kicking that off, because you have view of subscription deadlines or renewal dates, or somebody does within the system, and then you can kick it over into your partner's cubicle, who is a teaching and learning professional, and say, all right, gear up, lads, get out there and get the stuff done. We need the info. How often do you find that in your experience, CNI is ready to go do that and knows what they're doing?
Well, it's actually part of our budgeting process. So renewals happen at different times, but the budget cycle starts at the same time for everyone. And so that's just part of the budgeting process. And in fact, we have meetings. We bring different groups in and we have meetings about, okay, first of all, did you get your renewal quote? Secondly, have you reviewed the usage and the achievement data? So it's just part of how we determine if we're going to budget for something the next year.
Nice. Derek, what does that look like for PPS?
So we're starting to do the same thing. This is new to Portland Public Schools. So I'm super excited that Don and I are leading this with our Office of Teaching and Learning, but it's like a new muscle. It's going to be painful. You start working out, those first couple of days and weeks are going to hurt. Yeah. But once you've used those muscles, it will become easier. So we're doing the same thing. We, technology, have access to all of the budgets. We know who purchased it or which budgeting code funded it. So then we're now putting everything in. It's a long list, but we're putting everything together with the funding source, with the appropriate department, and then having the, because it is budgeting season for us, beginning to have those conversations with all the chiefs. And then we're asking those tough questions, which is also why we are using My Analytics for ClassLink as our SSO, and we're going to be using the Learn platform to help us make those informed decisions about renewals. So this is brand new. We've been in the renewal business, but without the justification, not for all, but certainly for many of these things.
So I feel like this is a great example of an evolutionary step or a progression, because it seems as though as we watch systems go through these sort of phases, that's a distinct phase. What you're doing right now, Derek, is something that all the people are doing or will do, and if they haven't gotten to the point where they're like, we need to use My Analytics, we need to start having SSO, we need to talk about ClassLink, we need to talk about Learn platform. Those are all progressions within that scale, and if we could offer advice to folks who are going to get there, it's kind of like your kids, right? You say, you know what, I'm going to protect you from these things by advising you that you shouldn't do those two things over there, and yet it happens anyway, and the kids are gonna stumble, they're gonna stub their toe, they're gonna fall and skin their knee, and sometimes, regardless of what we warn them about, it's just going to happen. And then it's our job to provide the scaffolding to pick them back up, dust them off, get them back out into the arena, and go to keep doing the stuff. But maybe there's, which is my hope, maybe there's scaffolding that we can start providing now, which is the whole reason why we're talking about this, for people to go, okay, yep, so when I fall, here's a couple of things I need to already have my eye on so that I can go put that stuff into place. So yeah, no, I totally agree. So then that's in terms of renewal. What are you doing, and where do you see sort of the retirement going? Because there's a whole, Derek, you and I experienced this, right? There's old technology. There's monitors tied to larger systems and banks of huge machines. And Carla, you probably experienced the same thing. And then trying to figure out who's got what. Funny story, when I was a classroom teacher, this is when technology was still sort of new, and I really needed to have technology in my room, and I may or may not have commandeered the cow, which was full of old school Mac laptops that are now doorstops, I'm sure. But I was snagging technology wherever I could find it, and I was picking stuff out of the closet and out of dumpsters, and I was putting that stuff in my classroom. And I'm sure that the IT department, when they walked through, was cringing because I was firing up whatever I could find because I needed my kids to have access. But now what, right? Because if you go into a classroom, if the teacher is using the tech and you say, I'm going to have to take that out of your hands because it's outdated. They're going to go, oh my gosh, no, you can't. It's a, what do we do about that? How do you go about getting that into the process as well?
So for us, it's about sustainability and replacement. So it's not that, and yes, this is being taken away, but this is what you're getting. Again, start with messaging, communication, the why. Also, especially with security being at the forefront of what we're doing. If it's an old device, we don't want to connect it to our network. And so there's many reasons why we need to replace, especially if you can't update or do patches. So whatever the reason might be, you want to get into a life cycle replacement plan. And that's challenging for districts. And this is a big concern. And I talked about this when we received our ESSER funds and all the money from the federal government. It's wonderful. Love that injection. What's going to happen when they stop giving it to us? Mm-hmm. And that's where we're there. September, that money goes away, and districts, hopefully, if they're not thinking about it now, will begin to very shortly look at the replacement or the removal of whatever they purchased, because it's going to become not only a risk from the teacher and the learning, because it will become disruptive, but also a risk to the security of the environment, because you're not going to be able to sustain it and patch it and do all the necessary things to it. So it's an iterative process. Many have been through it. The Council of Greater City Schools has a guidebook. COSN has a guidebook. We are resources. That's what I love about education. We're not in this alone. If anyone picked up the phone or sent an email, I'd be happy to give some tips and guidelines of how to do it. But at the end of the day, it costs. There's a cost of doing business to make these things happen. And it needs to be operationalized. This no longer really is the annual general budget for technology. It's just like the light bill. We're going to have to continue to pay for these services as long as we're going to be in this digital game, and I don't see that going away.
I don't either, and that's a little scary to me, because what we have seen is that, just as you were saying, the injection of some additional dollars allowed people to access these resources, which were then outside of the budget process, and they jumped for joy, gleefully went out and picked those things up. But now when I hear folks talking about next steps, the sustainability of that from a fiscal standpoint, I don't know that that's there. Carla, what are you seeing out there in the world in that regard?
So I will tell you that there was an opportunity. We took advantage of the first opportunity. Absolutely. We bought 5,000 Chromebooks. We got those babies out there, and we checked them out to kids. There was another round where we didn't take advantage of it, and we didn't take advantage of it because I kept saying, okay, if you buy these now, in 4 years, where's that money coming from? We struggle to replace what we already have. So I think it's going to be a real problem. I don't know that everybody really stopped, because there wasn't time to stop and think about that. But I just wrote an article about that for the TASA Journal about, it's time to take a look. You've let the genie out of the bottle. They've got these devices. But you've got to look at them and say, okay, really and truly, how are we using them? How are we using them? Are we using them? Do we just have them stashed over in a corner until it's time to do assessments? Is that really? And are you just going to keep them because the state said you have to do online assessments? That's not an effective use of that technology. So you really need to look at how you're leveraging those tools and take full advantage of them, so that you can justify to your board the investment in the replacement. But you do have to replace them, and you do have to say to those teachers when they say, can I just keep a couple of them? No, I love you, but no, we have to get them off of our network. So I think there's going to be a real struggle for a lot of folks.
That's interesting. I feel like if I was going to be able to turn the clock back and advise on where to spend money, and then remove some of the barriers and restrictions to that, I would ask people to spend money on practice change and really start with that. And that's, as you know, that's where you start, right? We can't get to any of the bright, shiny, and effective things that we want to accomplish with and for kids without actually taking a look at our practice and starting there, because otherwise we're just buying stuff. And we all know that that's not effective. That, I mean, it just isn't, and it never has been, whether it's digital or analog. Just getting stuff doesn't mean that it's going to be effective or efficiently used. So that's fascinating to me. So what about the retirement process? Is there a procedure that you all have in place for you're looking at the renewals, you're asking the questions about use. Are you asking about I think you're asking about efficacy or impact. What are your processes then for retiring things that may not be coming back simply because there's redundancy? Are you seeing any of that process?
So we're having the conversations, but we haven't done anything yet.
Okay.
So it's what are we going to do? So because we're beginning to look at the data, it just hasn't happened yet. I think the biggest piece of this, Chris, is the communication when we take it away. Are we taking it away, or is it replacing with something else? That's going to be the biggest change to the system, I believe, especially if we've been working a muscle for quite some time and we're now going to remove this equipment out of the exercise room. Okay, that's going to be I think the hardest hit to the system, but we're not there yet. And if we do make that decision, it certainly will be supported with data around the student outcomes, or it could be a budget decision. Time will tell, but communication is going to be the key to whatever we do, along with the data.
Thanks.
So
yeah.
I will say the same thing. I mean, if we're going to take something away, because it is part of the budgeting cycle, we tell folks, yeah, this is we're not bringing this back next year. And if we're going to replace it with something, we tell them what we're going to replace it with. But I think that also works the other way, because if there's something you've put in place and the district, the curriculum department, whoever has said that we are using this is going to be our system for X. Everyone's expected to use it. Okay, so how long does it take to institutionalize something? It takes 3 years.
Right.
So there will be folks who'll say, it'll be gone next year, I'm not going to use it. So, it's another question of how long do you wait it out, right? How long do you stick with it to let folks know that it really is an expectation?
Sure. So that's a great segue. So I sort of prepared a sort of a straw man here of the process that we're kind of talking about. And part of it is, and these aren't in any sort of order or chronologically, but identifying what's out there is that inventorying process that we talked about last session. We talk about the process for vetting, the process for purchasing, all the procurement stuff. Now we're talking about how do we jettison things, and the communication is critical. Still identifying gaps is something that we haven't kind of talked about. We touched on it with inventory, and I think it ties very directly to assessment of impact, because then you're looking for am I deep enough with resources for core ELA within these grade bands for the students, and is the right product in place? Identifying that is not as easy as it might seem, and you don't just sort of wander into a book room and go, okay, well, it looks like we got all the teacher guides and we've got the supplemental materials. It's much more complex, and in the digital age, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. And I think we're asking teachers to take a different look, and they're going to need some support. But then setting expectations for use, that's something that we've all here on this call experienced. And if the expectations are not clear and people aren't supported in the use of those resources, they could be fantastic resources. But if folks don't know how to use them or what the expectation is for use, then then they'll just sweep it under the rug and they'll go back to whatever they're comfortable with. And we see that, right? And you're nodding your heads. That's critical. And how are your systems then? Derek, you're in the beginning of this. Where do you see the communication strings coming out and sort of progressively building up that understanding of here's what is expected? And maybe you're not there yet. I don't know.
We aren't there yet, Chris, but you and I learned when we were at Evergreen that it starts at the top. Communication from the superintendent on setting expectations. Then we rolled it out to administrators of what it was, what we were doing, how we were doing it, so that when it got to the teachers, they knew how to not only observe it, but support it.
Right.
And so I think that's where we are as a district, starting at the leadership level of this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Then we're going to have that separate conversation with administrators so that they know what it looks like when it hits their building so that they can support their teachers. Mm-hmm. It is a practice change, you mentioned, and it takes time. If you want it to hold or stick to the wall or stick to the system, it's better to go slow than to go fast. To make sure that everyone is on board with the why, the how, and getting into the school, showing what it looks like, not just sitting in a virtual meeting talking about it, getting side by side with those teachers like we did, 5-6 years ago, however many years ago it was, to make sure a long time ago, to make sure that they understand, so that it adds value to their practice.
As I was listening, as you were recounting the steps, I started to tear away calendar pages, because what you just described is not a 1 or 2 year thing. The fact that you're beginning at the top and then going to administrators finishes off this year and jumps into the end of next. And so being realistic about what that time frame is, you can accelerate it, but you'd better be ready to throw resources at that acceleration. And you've got to be paying attention to the sort of the affective aspects of your shift, all of those, the non-technical aspects of that, because it's not. I hear people talk about this and they're like, yep, by next year we're going to be up and running with this thing, and I'm like, whoa, it's January of this year. Have we talked to the teachers yet? Well, no, but we've got until June. Nope, actually you don't. We're going to be well into the next year with that process. What are your thoughts, Carla, on that sort of stuff?
So I totally agree. You have to go slow. You have to. It does start at the top. You can even still get pushback when it does start at the top, right? Because just because it's new. But I think the next challenge for us, while we have been doing that, looking at them and looking at the resources and analyzing, are we using them? Are they being effective? I think the next challenge for us is looking at the resources that maybe 2 or 3 campuses buy, right? So maybe there's a reading program that 3 elementary campuses buy, and it's been through a process, but nobody really supports it, and we don't really know, right? So we don't know if it's filling a gap. We don't know if anybody's really using it. We don't know. So I think the next step for us will be, okay, if it's good enough for 3 campuses, is it something that they all need? Right? Is it something all the other elementary schools need? If it is, do we already have something that does the same thing? If we do, we don't need it. If we don't, and it is good enough for all the other elementary schools, then somebody at the district level is going to have to own it and say that it is and support it. So I think that's the next challenge.
Derek, you're nodding your head. What are your thoughts?
I'm in just complete agreement. I couldn't agree more in terms of ownership and accountability. I really don't have anything to add. I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, it's an insidious thing, because what we're talking about is equity, and we have all talked about this. All 3 of us have talked about this, and it isn't actually okay. It's not okay for some schools, and we've got them, right? Every system has lucky schools. They've got additional support from families. They've got whatever, and they just happen to have more than the school next door. That's not okay. We can't do that. And yet there are systems out there today. In fact, yesterday I spoke with someone who's got that same thing going on. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, they paid for it. How can we take it away if they paid for it? Well, what about equity? What about equity of experience? How do you do that? That's a huge thing. The other thing that I'm thinking about that I think we might wrap up with, a lot of this stuff falls down to CNI. And Derek, you and I used to have these conversations, and you would say, well, you know what, our job is to really make you guys look good. And so, it is going to have to come down to an alignment. And that's kind of the CNI alignment, and assessment of impact, and then being able to adjust. It's that plan, do, study, act kind of a cycle. What's missing in a lot of systems that I talked to today is the map, and the road, the pathway is not set for instruction. And so that makes it really, really hard to take a look at the feral apps and then go, oh, yep, these line up. Here's where they plug in. And so in my experience, having a curriculum map that at least guides you, it sets the floor, it sets the pathway forward, because without that, it's going to be really difficult to make any sort of judgment on efficacy or whether or not we have a gap. You just won't know. Where do you feel like your systems are in that sort of alignment? I know, Derek, you're in the beginning of this, so maybe Carla has some thoughts, and then Derek, I'll jump back to you.
So what you're saying is a real problem, and for us, it goes back to the vetting process. So even though there are things that don't get vetted, but even with the things that do, if everything gets approved, then is the process really working?
Right.
So I think you really have to consider that, because if everything gets approved, then is someone really owning it? Is somebody really paying attention to it? You really have to be concerned about that. And as far as the feral apps, the ones that are just out there, you, like Derek said, you really have to have a way to know what's being used. And for us right now, there's even a way to be able to stop access to some of those. So if it's free stuff that students, bless their hearts, are using during class that they don't need to be using, it has nothing to do with instruction, I can go stop that. I can go block those. So, and I certainly don't have time to sit around every day and look and see, but I do monitor that, or somebody monitors that, and we do take a look at those things. But it's going to continue to be a problem. I mean, as long as there are free things, as long as there are processes that don't necessarily do exactly the job that they were designed to do. And as long as, we haven't talked about this, but as long as if there are school districts that reimburse teachers for buying their own things, that's another problem. So we've got a long way to go.
Yikes. Derek, what are your thoughts?
It's practice changing, organizational and a cultural lift. That starts at the top, and the top could be CNI and technology alignment, Chris, as you mentioned, tech learnology, right, as you like to coin it, because we're #better together. We can't do this alone as a department or a person. So it's going to have to take concerted effort by departments, by leadership, to talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then to make it happen, then make it actionable. And then turn it into practice, because it isn't something, as Carla said, that you can do every day, but it does need to be part of the exercise that's done routinely and consistently. And you just have to get started, not just in conversation, but by action. So how do you do that? You just start. You just do.
Just jump in. You just jump in.
Yep.
I think about some of the systems that are listening, and they're like, yeah, that's nice, but but where do you start? And what if you don't have a good relationship with your CNI counterpart? And what if there's actual barriers that are in the way? Because I mess around with things. This is a fidget, but I'm also a Lego fanatic. And so how do you get in a room with your counterpart, dump out the Legos and start building? Because that's where you're talking about starting. That's right. That's the thing. And if like, how do you even counsel somebody who now has barriers through personality or through through culture? Where do you go to begin that process?
Find out the why. Hopefully you're there for the same reason, whether it's the students, the building. And if sometimes we have to humble ourselves, we might not be the right person. It might be someone on our team, but find the person that can begin to build those bridges. Because Chris, you mentioned a good point. Sometimes it is personality conflicts. So I'm sure that's not everyone. So just find that person within the department that can begin to repair or just start from scratch of building that relationship. It could start with a lunch. It might have to be after hours.
Right.
But this work isn't going to happen just within the hours of the school day. It's going to require doing something different.
Right. Nice. Carla, what are your thoughts as we start to close up?
I absolutely agree with Derek. You've got to start building those relationships, and if you can get yourself invited or get your instructional folks invited to curriculum meetings. That's what we do. We meet with our curriculum department once a month, and that really helps to build those relationships. That really helps to be there to answer questions that they may have. Even if it's just something, here's what we're hearing. Well, okay, let's explain to you what that is. Or we're thinking about this application, or even if it's us taking something to the curriculum folks. So get yourself invited to those meetings. If you can't get yourself invited, it's a school district. You can go sit in on those meetings anyway. So find out where they are. But yeah, building those relationships are the most important. And then as the very last resort, you can always fall back on security, right? Because we want our students to be safe. And so if all else it fails or it's taking a while to build it up, we start looking at the security of some of those applications, and you can use that as your leg to stand on.
Great. Yeah, no, that's good advice. And I think inviting yourself to those things might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's for sure one of the solutions. So we've got a couple of specific steps and things like that. And we talked about partnering, we talked about centralization, we talked about SSO. In terms of distinct resources to use out there, what are some of the things that you would advise folks who are on the call to go research or maybe just go get or talk to somebody else about? What are some of those resources that are going to help folks get down the path with these things?
Get class.
Call a friend.
Call a friend.
ClassLink, that's one. Yeah, definitely ClassLink. But call a friend or a new friend. You have to talk to someone who is there, who's either further down the journey than you are. I mean, that's, I think, how most of us got to where we are, is you start with conversations. You have to learn from others. That's the reason we're doing this today, and that'll help you leapfrog and get faster down the trail.
And if you have a state organization, join it. Because there are resources available in those organizations that can be very, very, very helpful to you. There are connections you will make with folks that you can call, that you can or they might have things on their website that if you're a member, you have access to. So check that out. I mean, you don't have to go to every meeting. You don't even have to go to their conference if you don't want to, although it's a really good thing because you'll learn stuff. But, look into that, because those will be great resources for you.
And that's a great point. I think joining organizations, or at least aligning with some. I mean, the Learning Council is one of those that you can align with, that's going to connect you with some other things. But I think of COSIN, I think of ISTE, I think of the FETCs in the world. All of those organizations, you don't really have to be, to your point, you don't have to be like all in. Just go and absorb some things and meet some people. If you need a friend to call, that's where you're going to go find them. And it's probably it's a good bet that somebody within those circles has done the thing that you're trying to do, and has failed a good bit and can help you to continue to move forward. I think that's great advice. It's something that I've done, I continue to do, and I take the learner stance, and that's what you kind of have to do in this business is go in as a learner and don't assume that you know, because the complexity of what we're talking about is dense, and we're not going to know it all, and we don't really have to. We actually don't have to, because we have friends, and the friends are going to help us to get there, and we'll do it together. One thing I want to end with is the vision, and this relates to strategic planning. It relates to all of the things that allow a system to move forward in a mindful manner. And that's a key that we haven't really touched on here, but I think it's going to come up in another Horizon room. And that is, what is your vision for the experience within your school system? Because everything rolls from that, right? It shows up as a portrait of a graduate. It shows up as active vision planning. And if you don't have that, all the rest of this other stuff is it's just stuff, and it's going to be virtually impossible to have cohesion in the system unless you have vision, and that's more critical than a lot of folks will give airtime for. But the number of school systems that I know today that don't have a clearly articulated vision and don't have a strategic plan that aligns everything else in the system is a little scary. And that's where we end up with feral stuff, because there's no lens. There's not a lens through which to make decisions. And so of course you're going to go buy some stuff, because why wouldn't you? You got money and there's no lens, there's nothing to measure it against. So just go get some stuff. That's scary to me. For those of you listening, that conversation is coming, because without that direction, somebody's going to have that. Somebody's got to have it. Your superintendent's going to have to do it. Your chief technology and academic officers are going to have to carry it. It's going to have to be articulated down the red line into the classrooms, if you even have those anymore. And that's what drives the whole thing. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to thank our guests today, Derek and Carla. Thank you so much for engaging in this. I really, really appreciate all of your experience and the input that you've provided folks who are listening. Always a great time to see you face to face-ish. I know, Carla, I'm going to be over in your neck of the woods, and we're getting together. And Derek, same deal. I'm going to be over there, and we'll actually get to talk face to face, and that's going to be a good day. So again, thank you so much to you folks. And any last parting thoughts?
For anyone wondering how, just get started. Just get started. Whether it's writing down, typing what it is you want to do, then go do it. Get started.
And go meet that curriculum director.
That's right. Absolutely.
Take them a Sonic drink or something. Just go meet
That's
them.
right.
A Sonic drink, a cherry limeade is what curriculum folks love. Cherry limeade, I can guarantee that. And the little round bits of ice, we love that kind of stuff.
And chocolate.
That'll earn big points, absolutely. And chocolate.
Always chocolate.
And unicorn. So thanks again to you folks. Thanks to everybody who is joining. I know that I've got some commentary on the sideline here in the back chat. Some folks have lots of questions, and that's great to see. So we're going to sign out today. Our next up for the Horizon Room is going to be, I don't know, because we're still developing that. But you can guarantee that visioning and strategic planning is going to be at top of that list, because it's a definite need. And we have some folks with real experience that will be joining us on that sort of stuff. But I'm looking for feedback. And there's going to be messaging coming out via the web, via email, via social media, and definitely throw your ideas out there, because I just need to know what's hot for you and where we can help and where we can bring resources together for you to support you. In the meantime, there's a digital matrix digital readiness assessment out there from the Learning Council. It's an interesting look at where you are in relation to a model shift. And it asks a few questions. It's not long, but it does ask some questions that are relative to all of the things that we talked about this past season in the Horizon Room, and it gives you a sense of where are you in relation to being ready to make the model shift that is actually necessary. We're not, traditional isn't right. We can't kid ourselves. That's just not going to be around any longer. And we have to be ready for it. And are you ready? The other place that you can connect, and we kind of mentioned this before, plan to attend one of our regional symposiums. We're getting on the road in February, and we're in 2 cities every week until the end of time. And we're going to be coming to a city near you. Check it out on the Learning Council website and get over there, because a similar conversation is being had there with real live interaction with some other partners. So anyway, great to have you folks on, and has been a great series. I'm looking forward to a fantastic spring series coming up, and have a great day, and we'll check you back in the spring.